Hey guys, welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on UNAS TV. Some of you are familiar with the Fredericktown battery recycling plant, critical mineral recovery, which caught on fire yesterday. Was all over the news in the Midwest, didn't make national news, at least not in the main headlines, but it should have, because I think what we're seeing there is a similar situation to what we saw in East Palestine, and luckily we had the same EPA supervisors to clean it up. And they immediately had people in surrounding areas evacuate. I'm going to get into a little bit about what is in lithium battery smoke and whether or not people should be concerned about it. But I don't think that a lot of people have heard about all the dead fish. Okay, this is one of those things where, you know, they're trying to keep it on the hush. They're trying to investigate what happened. I think we all know what happened. But basically, after this fire was extinguished, a bunch of dead fish started washing up in Village Creek. And these dead fish were actually confirmed by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. What they've said about it is that they assume that it has something to do with the battery plant fire, but they're not 100% sure. There was, by some reports and pictures that I've seen, some white foam on the surface of the water. So they're not 100% sure if it was suffocation of the fish, a lack of oxygen, or if there was actual chemicals in the water. That said, the EPA has not said that they've found a whole lot of elevated chemicals anywhere. They're doing 24-hour air quality monitoring, but they did say that just north of the site, and Village Creek is north of the site, they did notice some levels of elevated chemicals, although they didn't confirm what those chemicals were, but they were within the alert zone of the EPA, which is fantastic news because they had no alert zones when East Palestine happened. Actually, that could be worse if it's actually registering to them. And by the way, I want to just say this because I think that I don't want to confuse people, but I think state officials in Missouri do a relatively good job, especially when it comes to the Department of Agriculture. The Attorney General in Missouri has done a lot of great things over the last several years, and I think that they'll try and do their best to get to the bottom of this. So Village Creek, this waterway runs into the St. Francis River, which is a critical waterway because it supplies multiple people with water. It's critical to data centers. And it also runs down into the Mississippi River, which eventually makes its way through Louisiana and Arkansas. So maybe a lot of this lithium chemical will just end up down in the Smackover site, or maybe it will make mining that a little easier in the future. But these waterways are critical. They're waterways that we use as a water resource, and now we've got thousands of fish popping up in the headwaters of it. I think it's important to remember when a lot of these things happen, you know, they don't want to cause panic and fear. There are a lot of farmers and people who own livestock in those areas who had to evacuate. Read about one farmer, his last name is Lee. He has about a 100-acre farm, and this black plume smoke went right over his farm. And his concern, as would be my concern and anybody else's concern, is that number one, his livestock were breathing it in, his cows were breathing it in, and then the other concern is that these chemicals adhere to plants, get down into the soil, and they can cause long-term effects that we're not going to notice right away. And I feel like whenever we have these types of chemical disasters, industrial disasters, the first move that we see is, you know, we're reporting on it, we're recognizing the risks that are there, we're recognizing this, that, and the other thing, but then we're going to make it sound like it's safe to return home. And, you know, 6 months down the road, when animals and people actually start getting sick, hopefully everybody will have forgotten about it and not know where to file their lawsuit. In my opinion, this entire thing is a major disaster because it also highlights another risk that I've been trying to tell people about and warn people about for years on this channel. I am not against the use of lithium batteries. I have lithium batteries that we use as backup for our home. I think they're fantastic. They do a great job. I'm not against us diversifying our energy portfolio. I think that we should do that. I have said on this channel numerous times that all energy comes at a price. All energy comes at a price to the environment. All energy comes at a price to us. Nothing is clean. The fact that people use this term clean and green energy is beyond my comprehension, because this is a prime example of how toxic clean and green energy actually is. I would rather deal with the toxicity of CO2 than I would with this, unless you try and sequester the CO2. And I will get to that in a little bit in this video, because there are some serious issues with high concentrations of that as well. But my point is that all of these green energy, these clean energy movements come with risks, and we are at the cusps, the very beginnings of this. What we're seeing is a need for an increase in tenfold our energy supply, and that's because of artificial intelligence. Okay, when you ask Google a question, when you go onto Google search and you ask it a question and it comes up with some answers that requires a very little amount of energy. Artificial intelligence, which is starting to roll out and across every industry, around every corner, in every vehicle, and every cell phone, and all of that. Your daily life is being plugged into artificial intelligence at a rate that is unbelievable. Most people don't even realize that they're plugged into it, right? But it's crazy. It absolutely is crazy. But artificial intelligence takes 10 times the amount of energy to respond with an answer that a typical Google search does. Artificial intelligence takes more than 10 times, the amount of energy to operate your cell phone. And so when you think about this technology being implemented across all these things, and I've said this numerous times on our channel, it's this green energy movement has nothing to do with saving the environment, has nothing to do with putting us in a situation where we're going to pollute the waterways and kill everything in it. And I'll get to the impacts that it could have on livestock and people here in a minute. I just need to finish my rant. What this has to do with is increasing the energy supply and freeing up waterways for data centers to fuel this artificial intelligence. It has nothing to do with the environment. And I want you to look at those people who wear plastic all the time with their favorite outdoor company. And hey, I'm guilty of this. When I go hiking, I have my favorite outdoor clothing, which has got recycled plastic in it. But then those people who go around preaching to you about the importance of having solar farms and wind turbines and battery operated cars, and I want you to explain to them why they are not an environmentalist, because there's nothing that they're wearing, nothing that they're telling you, and nothing that they're putting out into the environment that is good for the environment. These are the same people who wear this clothing and then worry about microscopic plastics later on. There has got to be some sort of insanity behind it. Okay, now that I'm done with my tangent there. So according to the officials in Missouri, the situation is still dynamic. They're not 100% sure of what to expect from the fallout of this smoke. I did do a little research myself, and here's a little something to think about from smoke burning from lithium batteries. It can actually cause a range of health issues. And mind you, this was a giant plume of smoke that came out of this battery plant, impacted this agricultural community that is located between numerous national and state parks. And this is a beautiful area of our country, along critical waterways that feed south into the Smackover Foundation. We're not supposed to be worrying about this, even though 1,000 fish overnight have washed up dead. Okay, so some of these issues that it can cause for health issues are respiratory problems. Inhaling smoke can cause difficulty breathing, coughing, narrowing of the airways. It can also lead to pulmonary edema, which is a buildup of fluid in the lungs. Now, this could also be blamed on other certain diseases that have broken out over the years, so we may not be able to directly correlate those symptoms as we get further into this process, even though we know that the big black cloud of smoke was there, right? Skin and eye irritation. Smoke can irritate the eyes and skin, and that could be related to many other things. So they may not actually correlate that to anything. Other organ damage. The smoke can damage the heart, the thyroid, the kidneys. That's long term. And by the time people actually start feeling those impacts hopefully everybody will have forgotten about it. Do any of you remember what happened in Sataria? What happened there is a CO2 sequestration project went wrong. It blew up. And a bunch of people within the town of Sataria suffered from this explosion of the CO2 gases, which poisoned them. It was basically a miniature Lake Neos incident. Lake Neos was where these high concentrations of CO2 came out of the earth, which does actually happen, it's a natural gas, and killed everything from cattle to people around it. So these types of disasters do occur, but a lot of people have forgotten about it. And it's not spoken of anymore, even though that there were some long-term health effects from that. And part of the reason is because if people were to talk about it, then it would be a lot harder to start these CO2 sequestration projects around the country, like in the Summit Pipeline, areas like that. I mean, people just wouldn't want it near them. They wouldn't want it pumped near them. They wouldn't want it under their farmland if they knew that these types of incidents occurred. And that's why I think a lot of times when you look at things like this, East Palestine, when you look at things like the battery plant explosion, the first thing that we're going to experience is the forgetting phase. And in 6 months, most of you will forget it. And so most people won't be remembering this when things like the organ damage sets in. Cognitive issues could occur right away from breathing this in, but they could also happen over time as well. It's one of those side effects. People never talk about the side effects that come out later on down the road, and that way, you know, the industrial companies are protected, the industry is protected, the pharmaceutical companies. Did I say that? Muscle control issues, moving on to another side effect. So the smoke can cause muscle control and coordination issues. And again, these could happen over a long period of time too. They don't necessarily, sometimes, you know, when you're exposed to these chemicals, the actual long-term damage doesn't happen for a long period of time. And you know, I often wonder what's going to happen, you know, with the livestock. Okay, so the livestock gets exposed to these chemicals. They may not show anything, any signs of illness, any symptoms or anything until and then they go and get processed. You know, we're testing for things like Listeria, we're testing for things like E. coli, but are we actually testing for these types of chemicals? I know that in Maine they've put a hunting ban at certain areas. They do not eat the deer because of PFAS chemicals, even though people are probably taking the deer meat home and cooking it in Teflon pans, right? But they have basically a do not eat warning out in parts of the state. I mean, Maine's a little crazy when it comes to the PFAS chemicals, but maybe they're setting the standard for the future of the United States. No hunting the deer because they eat PFAS. But we're looking at a lot of livestock in this area that will eventually make its way into our food supply, and nobody's testing for that. And because nobody's testing for that, there's no other way for those farmers to be compensated for their losses because of this. But I think these are all serious issues. You know, if you're worried about eating PFAS chemicals, imagine eating an animal that has been exposed to the chemicals in lithium. What are those chemicals? Hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen cyanide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane. I thought this was the clean energy movement, the green energy movement. These gases can be poisonous or combustible, and they can pool on the floor due to their density. The smoke from lithium batteries can be difficult for first responders to identify because it appears black. Lithium batteries are found in, so they knew in this case that the smoke was from lithium batteries, and in fact they brought in contracted industrial firefighters, special firefighters, to go in and help clean up this mess. That's how hazmat situation this thing is, okay? These chemicals are horrific chemicals that are in these batteries that are now going down the waterways and going into the Mississippi and impacting everything in their wake. And if you don't think that they're hazardous, ask the 1,000 fish that are dead because of it. But here's the thing, guys. With this movement, these types of disasters are only going to increase, right? I mean, East Palestine, who was carrying these types of chemicals to put into these things. This is what our future looks like because we have taken such a movement towards this green energy standard, this green energy movement. And these words, like I said, and I say it all the time on this channel, they are trigger words. Did you know that solar farms, solar fields create basically big heat fields. They actually raise the temperature of the ground, of the surface. And the wind turbines, they disrupt the microbials of the soil. These things are pollutants. Like all energy, they all come at their cost. So my concern is not so much, that. I do think that we need to diversify. I think we need to have multiple sources of energy to reduce, and take a load off of the impacts that we're having. My concern is that we're not looking to reduce, we're looking to increase by over tenfold for current supply needs for machines. Somebody asked me the other day, well, if the people are gone, what would they need the artificial intelligence for? You're not understanding it. Remember that there's beehives, right? You have a lot of worker bees. They're all serving a purpose. They're all happy in their own little world doing their own thing. And the queen bee is always the queen bee of the hive, right? There's always a queen bee somewhere. Regardless of those of you who preach about communism, there's always a queen bee. And that queen bee just gets stronger when the government is stronger. All of them have a role and a task that they have to play. Until one day, you can program a bunch of machines to do it. Then suddenly you don't have to control all the thousands of minds that are in that hive. Tens of thousands, right? Imagine if a queen bee can produce all the honey and everything that she needed without having all those other bees. It would make management so much easier. We've been the intelligence in the past. As our population has grown, there's been many beautiful minds that have expanded with it, that have come up with some great advancements within society. But what if you no longer need that expansion? What if you no longer need those advancements, the human mind to be able to give you ideas? What if suddenly you can program a computer to sift through a bunch of things and come up with ideas? And what if it's more efficient? Then suddenly you don't need all the bees in the hive, right? You don't need them. You really don't. And then they become a nuisance. Because what you'd really like to have is more space in the hive. Maybe that's a bad example. I don't know. But it's something to think about. It's something that concerns me. And what's going to happen to all those jobs? If this is what they call equity and justice, I don't want anything to do with it. If you're saying that these lithium plants, these chemical burns that we've seen over the years from all of these chemicals that are going into these things, if this is what you call environmental justice, I don't want anything to do with it. If this is what you call environmental equity, I don't want anything to do with it. Because this is running people off of their lands, it's destroying people's lives, it's destroying nature, it's destroying plants, animals, everything around it. But this is also a disaster that you're not going to hear much about because there's an election in several days, and heaven forbid the EPA does as bad a job on this one as they have on every other disaster that we've faced under the administration. Which is why we need to talk about it.